Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It is an honor to have Nasrine Aboubakr Gross from the States with us today. We will be asking her a few questions and ask her to introduce herself, her work, actually her book, which she has been proposing as part of this peace project, which we aim to raise awareness about Afghanistan and Afghan people around the world. Over to you, Nasrine. بسیار زیاد خوش آمدین. Welcome to the program.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Asya Jan, thank you so very much for having me. I want to congratulate you and Shapur John for really holding this kind of meeting for a very, very important topic in the future, for the future of Afghanistan, which is peace. You are trying to see peace from all the dimensions that it has. I don't think anybody has tried that yet. And I'm looking forward to share with you the book that I have prepared. It's called Steps of Peace and Our Responsibility as Afghans in this session. Thank you again.
Very grateful to have you. To be honest, it is an honor to have you as an Afghan woman who has been actively participating in many areas rebuilding Afghanistan. I know from your previous book, which you have kindly sent to us to promote your work and also your writing, about 20 years ago, I believe. And we have been in touch with yourselves for a very long time. You have been actively engaged with supporting couples in Afghanistan, initiating various different projects and participating in various different human rights initiatives and various women's rights initiatives. If you kindly tell us more about your work, that would be really amazing to know.
Thank you so much. Maybe I should say a few words about who I am. Nasrine Gross. I was born and raised in Afghanistan. I graduated from Malala High School. I went for 1 year to Kabul University in the Department of Law and Political Science. And this is a while back. Actually, that was the first year that the university introduced the concours examination, which is very famous now in Afghanistan. But in those first years, the concours was not for university entrance. It was actually to select who can have foreign scholarships. So that year I participated, and I was the third. The first person went to America. The second person got a scholarship for France. And the third person, me, I got a scholarship to go and study at the American University of Beirut. And so I went there. I stayed there for about 6-7 years. I had come from Malala High School, so I didn't know English. And first I had to learn English, but I got my BA from the AUB. Some of my best years and best memories are there, but also AUB in Afghanistan is kind of famous because some of the most famous men working on Afghanistan are graduates of AUB, like Zalmay Khalilzad or Ashraf Ghani. We were all at the same time there. Now, I moved to America in 1971. And stayed here. I worked with computers. In those days, computers were those huge computers, very few women in it, working with it. And I worked with those big computers as a contractor to the federal government. And there I learned the methodology of how you build systems. I did a lot of requirements analysis. I did system design. I did coding. I did life cycle management. I wrote a lot of books about those things. And I mentioned this because it really polished my knowledge of how you create a book for information, how you gather data. And so after maybe 15, 20 years, I started working on books for Afghanistan using some of that methodology. And I'm very happy about it. So far, I've had maybe 5 books, but I've also had quite a number of academic articles, and I have attended quite a number of seminars and conferences around the world, both in English and Farsi and sometimes in French. So I am very happy that Asia and Shapur are holding these sessions so that I could share with the audience and with the viewers some of the things that I have in this book, which I think is very, very relevant for what we have going on in Afghanistan.
Impressive sort of journey that you have been having since leaving Afghanistan, I believe in 71, is that right? It has been a long time. Any slight memories of your time whilst you were there, and then in comparison as to what you think Afghanistan is going through now?
Well, it's the changes have been really beyond belief. We don't understand actually how when you have a war and it lasts as long as this war has lasted, which is almost 2 generations, what kind of havoc it plays with the fabric of society. It's not just your institutions, your official institutions, but also the social and political and economic institutions, the educational institutions, your values, the way you relate with people, who the people are that actually inhabit cities, who the people are that are in the villages. All of these have gone drastic change. And so we cannot, I do believe that we cannot reach a complete peace, a long-lasting peace among ourselves and with the outside world if we do not understand the meaning of these changes. So if you want me to paint a picture of what Afghanistan was like, or how I was at the university in 1965, the first year of the university there, we wore dresses, short dresses, knee length, just below the knee. We wore nylons, and they were not black, they were just skin color. We had long sleeves. I wore just a frock, so there were buttons in front, and I wore I had 2 or 3 of them, and I would wear them interchangeably. But others wore blouses and skirts or a suit. In those days, the whole world did not wear pants. Women did not wear pants. It was not a very popular garment. So we didn't have pants, but we wore skirts or dresses. I wore a very small scarf on my head. And then very often it fell down from our head and nobody said anything. Towards the end, many of us did not wear a scarf. Many women in Kabul city wore just a small scarf and the same type of garment to be outside. One thing that was very good was that there were many graduates from high school, both girls and boys. And so for the girls, because we had just began, many girls had started. That was the second generation of girls going to high school in Afghanistan. They, as soon as they graduated, they would have many suitors, because families wanted their sons to marry an educated girl. So they never stayed home for long. Within the first 6 months, they were getting married and going to the husband's house. But also the government needed educated women for all these offices and schools that they were opening. And so girls graduating from high school very quickly also got a job from the government. And that way, within 2 or 3 years, actually, it affected the economy of Kabul. I think the same was true for Herat and Mazar-e-Sharif and Kandahar to a certain degree in Jalalabad, but most of it was in Kabul. Within 2 or 3 years, these very newly married couples and very young couples, they became middle class. They had, and so a lot of the values of middle class was, they exhibited. They liked to buy new furniture. They liked to buy new clothes. They liked to cook new foods. So these brought values, new values into society. And it started to actually create what we call in sociology a critical mass of people. In order to change society, only a few people are not enough. You need to have a critical mass of people that would bring that change. And I do believe that towards the end of my, not towards the end of my schooling, but in the decade of democracy, we had reached a kind of critical mass that social change was taking place kind of on automatic pilot, whether we wanted it or not. So that was something very good for me to remember, how people reacted to new values, how people reacted to social change, how the government dealt with new things and social change. Those were very good things. And of course, Afghanistan was at peace, and that helped a lot in terms of social change.
All of these areas, they require massive sort of long-term conversations, and you have pointed out so many other areas which I really would like to continue asking, and I'm aware that we have got very limited time, and I don't want to sort of sidetrack onto another dimension, although you have been doing social science research for a very long time in your previous work as part of your previous publications, and as an author you have already created a social change yourself, because you have written about various different memories. And I, as far as I can see, and from if I read your entire journey, from the minute you have graduated, you have not stood still or just dedicated yourself as a mother or just as a housewife. You have actually gone out to the field, and I'm pretty sure that your mother, who has been very active in as a woman in parliament in the 1960s even, played a huge sort of maybe inspiration for yourself. But just a slight sort of indication as to what made you decide to become an author, and whether your own sort of family background also, provided you that opportunity or platform or inspiration in that sense. just a few words, and then we will go over to your book, which is mainly, this conversation is mainly about your contribution to the Peace Initiative.
This is an interesting question for me. I think it's a number of things. Yes, my family, both my mother and my father were writers. They wrote books. They were teachers to begin with. Then they went into politics and other things and bureaucracy, but they were, and they loved reading books. So in my home, I grew up with a lot of books. And I don't want to repeat myself, but I think I've mentioned this thing that when we turned 8, and in those days people didn't really have birthday parties, but my father would take our hand and take us to the one of the only two bookstores in Kabul and introduce us to the bookseller and say, this is my daughter or this is my son, and from now on she will come once a month and buy 2 books from you. Please give them to her, and at the end of the month I will come and pay all of my debts to you. And so from then on, which was, I think we were 3rd grade or something like that, by the time we finished high school, we had a small library, each of us, and we shared it with friends and neighbors and community, because those were the beginning of education and books, and there were very few books. People did not read a lot of books. So I did read a lot of books. In other words, I had realized from very young age that books are a good friend of a person. And I had also, I think it helped me because I had seen my parents write books. And so I had a role model for that. But really, when my son finished high school and went to another city for college, I got to have some time for myself, because my husband and I were working outside the home during the day, but in the evening and weekends, we were not as busy as when our son was with us. So I thought, well, this is a good time to kind of take a walk in the memory lane in Afghanistan. You understand this, when we are outside Afghanistan, we love Afghanistan. It's never far from our mind, but we cannot reach it all the time. It's been at war. You cannot go there. You cannot receive visitors from there. You cannot even receive mail, letters from there. So I missed it quite a bit, and I said, okay, how can I go back in my mind? And I found that with my computer background, I could collect information. And so the first book I wrote was about the first girls' high school, my own high school in Afghanistan, which kind of took me back with my friends and my teachers and people I knew. And then the second book was Steps of Peace and Our Responsibility as Afghans, because as you and your husband are realizing, that is in the forefront of our thoughts and prayers and our pain and our tears these days. We all want it to come to an end. Afghans, the citizens of Afghanistan deserve peace and quiet and in a regular, normal life of, happiness and joy and maybe tears and watching family grow as anybody else in the world. So that's what I did. That's really the beginning of it for my writing.
Thank you for the very insightful sort of information. It's really nice to talk about your journey into becoming an author in a very established as such that you are actually taking it to the next level, where you are actually also combining it on proposing with your writing changes, and every writer has got some purpose. Your purpose is far beyond just to entertain or just write just for the sake of satisfying yourself as an author, knowing that through the writing you're able to find some contentment or some sort of time for yourself to remember. So you're writing your second book, which you are intending to republish, I believe.
If you can see it.
Yes.
It's in Farsi. It's called Steps of Peace and Our Responsibility as Afghans. I am a compiler of it. And these are the people who have participated in it. And I published this myself in 2000. But what happened was that as soon as this was published, I remember it was, I think, 20th of May of 2000. I think I went to immediately I went to Dushanbe, Tajikistan. That was the heat of the Taliban. And we had, I was going to attend a meeting of Afghan women in Dushanbe. And that's what I did. And that was the beginning of my involvement with the cause of Afghanistan. And so I never came back to this book. I never advertised it. I never reviewed it, although there were a few people like Dr. Wardak who heard about it. And at that time, I think he was in Canada, and he asked for it and was, I think, used it in his classes. I am not 100% sure, but I know that he used it in some ways. So I'm very glad that I'm coming back to it, and I would like, it's still very cogent, it's very still apropos, and if you would like me to talk about what it's about and how it's done, I can begin talking about it.
Yes, definitely. But before we go out talking about how you took it forward, or you have been actually working on it, what made you decide writing about this?
Well, as I said, when you're far away and you hear here and there what's going on, you begin to wonder, what is it that cannot get resolved? Oh, okay. Every war comes to an end. And this keeps on going. And for me, coming back after 20 years of not thinking about Afghanistan in these terms, and thinking that war is still going on, even though the Soviets have left, what's going on? So I began thinking about it, and I began reading a little bit about war and peace, what are the processes. And then I realized that, war separates people. Peace brings people together, but war separates them. In Afghanistan, like most countries of the world, we are not a very uniform, homogeneous group. We are really different social groups come together. We are ethnically different people. We have different religions, different sects, different languages. And so I thought, well, okay, if war really separates, then these people have been separated from each other in that way for over a generation. And maybe they have forgotten how the others have make peace. Maybe they have forgotten each other's traditions, way of life, values. And then it also occurred to me that really from the very beginning, because education has been very recent in Afghanistan. Now I'm the second generation of Afghan women that are educated, and my mom was the first, and my brother is the third generation of men. Asia is the third generation of women, and her husband is the fourth generation of men that are educated. So that's a very small, short time for education, which means that Afghans have not had time to create, to actually codify and document their knowledge about themselves. You realize that places like America, they are very, very involved in doing research about themselves. It's one of the biggest items of expenditure in America. They go to the smallest area of a city and they really study it and do research about it to find out, okay, what makes that area tick? How do people behave? What are their values? What are their mores? What is their history? Afghanistan actually has not had time to create that. So to begin with, we don't know each other in that way. And I started questioning myself, okay, I'm a Tajik, but what does that mean? Why am I called a Tajik and my cousins whose father was from Kandahar are called Pashtuns? And somebody else is called an Uzbek. What does this mean? So I started reading about ethnicity and ethnic groups around the world. And then I, of course, moved very quickly to social groups. Because as I mentioned, Afghanistan is not just ethnicities. In fact, there is no citizen of Afghanistan that does not belong to an ethnic group. Socially, in sociology, that's the way we are. Now, people who are educated, a lot of times they say, I don't belong to this ethnic group. I am a citizen of Afghanistan, which we can call by constitution Afghan. I'm an Afghan. But in fact, every Afghan sociologically belongs to an ethnic group. The same way that in, say, in America, there are whites that are German-based or, origin or French or English or Italian. In England, there are Welsh people and there are Scots and there are Irish, and I'm sure there are others that I don't know. In England also there is the Anglican Church, and then there is some other Protestants, and there are Catholics. And the same type of divisions exist in Afghanistan, except we have a few more divisions. We have the language, and we have the literature and Islam, and of course we had the Jews and the Sikhs also. So I had to kind of come to terms for myself. If I'm a Tajik, what does that mean? And I realized that I didn't know, because at the time that I was studying, these things were not so important anymore for us. We were really the system of education, which I might talk later, in formation of the identity, was such that we were getting away from these divisions. But then I realized that with the war, these things, since war separates, you move, it pushes you to your most comfortable part, and that is your ethnicity and some other things. So I had to find out for myself, and I realized that there were not many books about these things, and so I had to find knowledgeable Afghans for this kind of study, and that a big part of my methodology centers around that.
The way you described it, it was very beautifully presented in that sense, and the methodology of your book in a way touches on that concept. So if you kindly explain as to how you went about it, how did you gather all the information together, and what your plans are for the book, because you, of course, it is available for to purchase, but your intention is to encourage others to actually take that sort of concept forward. And as such, I also would like to say this is more or less linking to this whole project. This Peace Initiative is, in a way, through multimedia practice to create that. You, as a writer, have established that, but this very project itself is aiming to bring various different perspectives into play in order to ensure that people get various different dimensions. In 2013, I did a video art installation about 15 people's perceptions and reflections about Afghanistan. And it was quite interesting to see everyone's different viewpoints, but yet what they all said in common was in common. There was a very simple statement at the end, which I actually gathered from talking with various different people, that Afghanistan was at peace. It had its established ways of managing peace and maintaining peace, although there were lots of problems.
You bring up a good point that I had to know what I wanted out of this book. I had to know who my audience should be. I had to know what it meant for Afghanistan, and I had to know what it meant for me as a person. As I am not the kind of writer that would create things out of my mind and write novels. I just am not, but I do think about things, and a lot of times I like to share it, and so I need to actually resolve an issue within me before I could share it with the readers. And so one of the most important things, once I realized that this topic has not been dealt with in the Afghanistan way. Yeah, there are lots of books about peacemaking, about peace building, about transitional justice, about different countries going through these issues, but it has not been written about Afghanistan. Even non-Afghans have not done much research about it at the time that I started. They were doing it maybe as a project for the United Nations or someplace, but no Afghan was involved with it, and non-Afghans had not written about it. So one of the most important, so I had really a blank canvas. And in order to create your material, you need to actually not only just read the books that are available, the documents that are available, but you also need to gather information, and that is done through a questionnaire. And so I wrote a questionnaire. I thought very long, I think maybe 6 months or a year, about what needs to go into that questionnaire. Sometimes you cannot ask a question very directly, but then I had to also make a decision which groups I want to be involved in this. As you know, we have many ethnic groups, and I couldn't get all of them because the book would have been several thousand pages. So I had to make a decision, okay, what ethnic groups, then what linguistic groups, what religious groups, what social groups, what political groups. I had to make a decision on that. And then for each one, I had to find, I told you there were no books, so I had to find somebody who was an Afghan who belonged to that particular social group. And I had to find him. I had to introduce myself. I had to talk many hours on the phone and convince them that I am not collecting some bad information to hurt them. It's just about peace and about Afghanistan. And then I would send them to the questionnaire. And even then, not everyone accepted. I have, of course, the entire process in files for my own documentation. And so whoever I sent a request, I have it. And whoever sent me a response, I have it. Quite a number of people actually said they could not do it because they were, they were mostly refugees, diaspora refugees. They didn't have access to documentation. And they said there are no documents about these things. So it has to be our own knowledge. And quite a number of people said they couldn't do it. I also found out that when you are in big pain, you actually cannot write in a rational, logical, informative way. You are just spewing out pain, whether it's cursing, whether it's anger, whether it's feeling totally helpless, that comes out, and so you cannot get information. And this was very, at the time I was collecting this was when the Taliban had massacred in Yakaulang, and I was looking for a Hazara person to write, and I went through maybe 10, 15 Hazaras, and they all were so full of pain of this massacre, even though they were not from Yakaulang, but it was their ethnic group, and it was their citizens of Afghanistan. And so that was another thing. And then when I got, it took a long time for people to write. I think the book, maybe I have written it in the first chapter, my entire methodology. I think maybe it was 3-4 years that I collected the material, because this is not the kind of thing that you would say, oh, sure, I'm going to write it as soon as I get your questionnaire. Everybody had to think about it and come face to face to this reality. Okay, I'm a Pashtun. What does that mean for me? How should I say it to somebody else who is not a Pashtun? Or I'm an Uzbek. How can I introduce myself to others? And then think about the steps of peace that is in among the Uzbeks. Not everybody thinks about these things. So it took people a long time. And once they sent me their response, I looked at those, and then I got back on the phone and we discussed each point. I wanted to make sure that I understood what they meant. And sometimes they had gone off on a tangent, or they were, as I said, they were too had too much pain, so they were talking a lot of painful things. So I had to talk. Some of those I made comments and I sent it back to them, sometimes maybe 3 times, 4 times, and many times of telephone conversations. One thing that actually helped me was that with, like my other books, I had from the very beginning, because I didn't know much about this, I selected 3 advisors, and they were stellar advisors about Afghanistan. One of them was my mother, Mrs. Rokia Habib. She knew Afghanistan. She knew all these social groups. She was old enough to see people grow and have children and grandchildren. And so it was very, very good for her to be, for me to sound her off on things. The other one was Dr. Rawan Farhadi. He is, of course, an encyclopedia and the best museum of Afghanistan. I mean, he is so knowledgeable that everybody respects him for that. And on top of it, he's the kind of person that once he accepts a project with you, he sits and reads your writing word for word. And this book is 375 pages. And I know that he read it word for word because in each page he has made a correction or a suggestion, and that was very good. The third person was the late Aziz Naim. He was the son of Prince Naim, the nephew of Prince Dawood. He had seen war in his own family. The king of Afghanistan was his uncle. His own wife was the daughter of the king. So can you imagine in that household when Prince Dawood took over and Aziz Naim, of course, had experienced 17 members of his own family shot to death in the span of a couple of hours. So he knew the pain, he knew the every step of the war. And I wanted to see, what kind of advice he gives me and how much he has healed himself. So these 3 people, I was in touch with them, maybe in those 2, 3, 4 years that it took me to write the book. Maybe every 2 months I talked with them. The one thing that was that made the book possible, because of the situation of war in Afghanistan, and as I said, it separates people, and people develop a lot of they're cross with each other, they cannot talk, there has been a lot of blood, literally blood flowing among people, killings happening, destruction happening. I didn't want people to know who else was writing. I wanted people to just tell their own story regardless of who else was in the book. And I also didn't tell it to anybody else, whether they were in the book or not. I didn't go around saying, hey folks, I'm writing this. No, I kept it to myself, and I also didn't tell, for example, Rahnaward Zaryab is one of the people that he wrote about peace in the Farsi literature. I didn't tell him that for the Pashto literature, Jahani was writing. I said somebody else is writing, and so that helped the book, the integrity of the book, and the integrity of the information that they were providing. So before I could send this questionnaire, because I was reading, there was a researcher that by the name of Laderack that had come out with a book that he had tried to in an academic way, in a kind of mathematical way, that war and peace are a continuum, and it goes through a normal bell curve. In other words, societies are at peace, and then slowly conflict begins until it reaches really war, which is defined as killing a person. And then when that goes for a while and they realize that that doesn't resolve something, then they start talking and making conferences like Doha about peace, and slowly they are lowering the violence, and finally once they reach an agreement, then it becomes again a state of non-war and very little conflict, which is the state of peace. So I used that. I had decided that I'm going to collect this information and see what the bell curve of war and peace is in Afghanistan. Let me show you, if I may. Okay. It was the bell curve of war and peace, the normal bell curve of war and peace. And what I wanted was that when I received the information from these groups, maybe I will reach to a conclusion about what the bell curve of war and peace looks like in Afghanistan. And I did come up with that. I did not actually analyze the data that I received. I did a little bit standardization, not a lot. So the data is really raw, but very, very good data. And but I did get a little bit to see what the bell curve is like in Afghanistan, which explains why war is taken so long. And that is a very important point for the peace talks in Doha, why it's that way. So I was very lucky that people responded to me, and I received them, and it took several years because it's hard to get information from, say, Pakistan, or from somebody that's in South America, or somebody that's in Germany, or it was just very difficult in those days because we didn't have all the social media. During that time, I wrote the 6 chapters that belong to me. The first 3 chapters that define the breadth and width of the problem. My scope of work, my methodology is in the first chapter, and the second chapter is war and peace as a continuum of each other. And the third chapter is about the problems that exist that prevent us from coming to a resolution. And some of those are also very important in terms of the talks in Doha and in terms of creating the knowledge base of Afghanistan. Two of those things are, one is a national identity. Afghanistan actually is a very young country. We know that Afghanistan in the history and antiquities we have from that geographical area, it's 5,000 years of perhaps continuous civilization. But as a country, as a modern entity, a member of United Nations, it's pretty, it's since Amir Abdurrahman, it's not before that. And so we need, it started then, and then as a full country, it started with the Amanullah, Shah Amanullah. So it's almost now 100 and some years. It's not several hundred years. It's not, of course, 1,000 years. And so we need to pay attention how in the modern world we create a national identity. The national identity that was created in England from Magna Carta, if I'm not mistaken. It's over 1,000 years. And the national identity that the French created is from the French Revolution and, you know, some of the other things. And there is a method to that. There are things that have to, when you say you are an Afghan national, a citizen of Afghanistan, what does that mean? Me as Nasrine, what should I have? How should I look? What should I say in order to be considered an Afghan national, a citizen of Afghanistan? And that's a culture of its own. And this culture actually cannot come from a void. Nowhere in the world has a country been able to create a national identity from void. Even America, as one of the newest and most successful of the countries, they have a way of creating values that become part and parcel of the national, an American national and an American citizen. Of course, it's a joke that, you know, apple pie is one of those things, but it is that way. And so we have had problems in creating this Afghan national identity. And I discuss it in the book with the different eras and each era what it did. One of the best things that happened during King Zahir Shah's time was that first it was 40 years, which is almost like 2 generations, but it was, they used the educational system, and I think most of the new countries have used the educational system to create the national identity. And we had public education. There was no private education. So the textbooks we studied all over Afghanistan were the same. We had our religion taught in schools from 1st grade till 12th grade. We had some kind of religion as a subject. And it was the same thing all over Afghanistan. And then with it, there were some of the ideals of progress and these things for Afghanistan, so that we knew when we talked with each other, we understood each other very easily. While the 40 years of war now, the system of education has been on and off. The system of education has not been the same all over. The system of education has gone through several different textbooks. The communists had one ideology, one way of looking at the textbooks in education. Of course, before that, a different one, the Mujahideen, another kind, and the Taliban, another kind, and even now, another kind. So it becomes very difficult for students to actually, it becomes difficult for the state to actually help its citizens develop good, knowledgeable citizenship of Afghanistan. I am so surprised that every Afghan loves Afghanistan, because we are really, the last 40 years, we haven't done a good job of creating Afghan citizenship, inculcating this Afghan national citizen in a good way. And of course, there are so many interpretations of Islam that almost no two Afghans can see eye to eye. Anywhere you go with the 5 or 10 people, there are at least 3 or 4 different views of what Islam should be and how it should be taught and how it should be practiced and what it means. This is a problem in building the Afghan national personality. And I have come up with a formula of what the Afghan national personality is made up of. And it's in the book. It's first family, the second is religion, the third is ethnicity, and finally at the top sits the national identity. And these 4 elements were good when there was peace, but now after 40 years, these 4 elements have been really affected very negatively. And so we have to think about how we do it, how we reinstate something that will help us build this Afghan national citizen. Without it, we cannot come to a complete peace. We cannot get to know each other. This is one of the problems that I discuss in chapter 3. There are some other ones. Also, a couple of them are very, very important for the Doha talks. And then there are 17 different persons talking about in the book about their own group's steps of peace based on that questionnaire that I sent. And of course, I had to change the questionnaire for every person because it was a different social group, like a religious group or a literary group or a social group, family, how families dealt with in Afghanistan. And then the last 3 chapters I deal with through a very little analysis, but I could see through reading these 17 different responses, I came up with the steps of peace, the parts that peace has in Afghanistan, which parts have to be present in order for peace, in order for us to be able to come to peace. One of the most important of that is how you come to, I forgot the word, iltiyam, healing. How do you heal from all this attack on you, on your life, on your family, on what you hold dear? You know, we lose a family member and it takes 2 years to actually grieve and come to healing. In Afghanistan, over 1 million people have been killed. Over 7 million people have become refugees. Several other people are injured and are handicapped. Almost every household has gone through trauma. And in the last 20 years, since I moved to Afghanistan in 2001, and I've lived there since then, I don't remember too many occasions that the Afghans or the state have done things for helping to heal the citizenship, the citizenry, the populace. Most often, everybody, they are in a culture of war. They hurt each other. They say negative things about each other. They are mostly talking about, well, this group is good, but this other group, they're not part of humanity. So then we have a hard time establishing or building peace. And so in those last 3 chapters, one of them is steps of peace, steps of war and peace, and different elements of war and peace. What are those? I discussed that with the graphics and all of that. And what the modern views of ethnicity are, and what needs to happen in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is not the only country that has problems with ethnicity. Just look at America the last year and what's going on with ethnicity. They call it race, but it is also an ethnic situation. So that's what I discussed. Then the next chapter I discuss what are some of the things that should happen. What are some of the things that actually hurt us so much? What are some of the things that I say, no, this guy killed my brother for no reason. I cannot forgive him. What is it that makes us keep this hate, this vengeance, this not getting past this? And I mentioned those things, and I talk about healing, and of course part of healing is forgiveness and what forgiveness means. And then finally, I also talk about some things beyond and what needs to happen. And all of these 6 chapters, I think, are very cogent for both what's going on in Doha, but also practitioners inside Afghanistan. But also, I am really hoping that researchers who are now both Afghans and non-Afghans, and I listened to some of them on this portal with Asiya and Shapur running it. They can benefit from using this book. reading and getting the information. It may answer some of their questions, but it will also help them get further. And that's where I think, I hope will happen, because I started this book and I knew that it was going to be a preliminary and elementary, because I didn't know, and also there was not enough material about it. So but I want other researchers to take different parts of this and take it one step further, because we are still not completely knowledgeable about everything there is about war and peace among the different social groups of Afghanistan, and then what's the totality of the answer for Afghanistan. So I'm hoping that those things will come. It has 5 or 6 appendices, and I have a good bibliography, both in Farsi and in English, until the time that the book was published, the year 2000. There are other books now, so it needs an update. But the main points, I think, have remained the same. Another appendix is a glossary. And that is where I think researchers could really help us out. Farsi of Afghanistan, which we call Dari, is very, very poor in terms of these expressions, in terms of the words that we use. Even for conflict resolution, there are several ways of saying it, and none will give you the same meaning. So it will be good for a group of experts, sociologists, to sit down and come up with a dictionary of war and peace as they are used in Afghanistan. So I am hoping that when you hear this presentation, you could contact me directly with my email, kabeltech@gmail.com, or via Facebook. I don't know, I have too many friends on Facebook, but Nasrine Grouss. If you have any questions, or if you want to order the book to see it for yourself, because the graphs that are there, and of course the biography of the people that wrote there, and the writings themselves that are really the raw data, primary material, are all in this book, and it needs another sequel to it, or different people can take different parts of it and enrich it, make it more complete for this time, because 20 years have passed and new issues have come up that need to be addressed. Thank you for having me.
It has been an honor talking to you, and we very much look forward to, seeing the progress of it via other participants and other collaborators with yourself, or future researchers taking what you are proposing as part of this contribution towards Afghanistan, I would say. As you are aware, this whole this whole point of like communicating with yourself and other knowledgeable people, knowledge itself is for us wealth, and if we actually take this wealth to Afghanistan and contribute towards the future of Afghanistan in its state building and nation building, and of course for the purpose of healing itself, and as you rightly say, war and peace, they go, though, as you rightly say, using a curve. But I also think it actually is in, goes hand by hand, because in any war, if people are not resilient, they won't be able to survive. And Afghan people have survived for over 42 years. Of course, we are very hopeful of what, the future will be like. But I think Afghan people themselves have been wanting peace right from the beginning. And as such, if they actually continue to be resilient, to continue to not lose their hope, and continue to be strong enough to, contribute towards their own country, then that will be a very, very fruitful future for Afghanistan and the Afghan people, and to be honest, also worldwide. So the whole point of this platform and this engagement is to create this Afghan library, Afghan Peace Center in the name of Afghan people, as a form of healing itself. So we very much hope that others will contribute towards this platform, will contribute towards this archive, which will be for the future people of Afghanistan and non-Afghans as well, because nowadays everyone is engaged with Afghanistan. So I very much look forward to having you again, and thank you sincerely for your contribution and your participation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I really hope that you will be able to turn this effort into a center of peace studies regarding Afghanistan. We really need a center like that, so that you will collect the documentation, whether it's visual, audio, or books, and there will be a central place where researchers could come and really delve into it and contribute to world knowledge about this issue that has been going on for a long time and unnecessarily. Thank you for having me, and good luck.
Thank you very much, and we look very much forward to welcoming you again. Thank you.